Maybe it would be worthwhile talking a little bit about the subgroups. You had mentioned, indeed, that the diverse schools are really having a hard time making it, and I am assuming because they have so many subgroups. Can you comment on that?
Right. In order to make AYP overall for the school, you have to make AYP in every individual category. And a lot of those categories have to do with subgroups, either subgroups that are racially delineated, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, even though there are no schools with enough Native Americans to have a subgroup. But and also you have to make AYP, if you have enough students in any of those groups, you have to make AYP for every single one of those groups in order to make AYP overall. So the more subgroups you have, the more obstacles you have to overcome in order to make AYP. So it's the schools that are the most diverse that are the ones that have a higher rate of not making AYP than the more monolithic schools where, typically all the students are white, there are hardly any low-income students. Now, when we did the story that you're referring to, at that time, the threshold for having a subgroup, at least having a subgroup where their test scores will count toward AYP, was 40. And that basically meant that you had to have at least 40 valid tests for students of that subgroup in order for that test to count under AYP. If you have 39, then it doesn't matter what the score was for that subgroup. It doesn't matter.
So what does that really mean, it doesn't matter? So if you have 39 Native American students in a school, their scores aren't recorded?
It's not recorded under AYP for the purposes of seeing how that particular subgroup is doing. One of the purposes of No Child Left Behind was to start delineating the test scores by these different categories, by race, by income status, to see how the subpopulations in your school are doing. That was one of the stated purposes of the law. Yet, there are various loopholes where schools don't necessarily have to do that, and that's one of them. If the threshold is 40 tests, you may have in an assessed grade more than 40 students of a particular subgroup who took the test, but if 5 or 6 of those tests were invalidated for one reason or another, let's say they just didn't finish them, or let's say that a couple of the students started after September 30th, if the number of tests dipped below 40, then under AYP purposes, the performance of that subgroup isn't recorded. So we found that happens at a fair number of schools where the number of tests that they have for a subgroup just dips below that 40 threshold. And now the threshold has been raised to 45. So the number of schools where that's the case has even increased more now.
I guess there are so many questions I have for you, but I'll try to bring them into a nutshell. One of the concerns, I think, of a lot of administrators is to make that AYP, or for principals to make sure that those scores look good. Darnell, in your reporting, is it fair to say that there's a lot of pressure on administrators to make their scores look good?
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on administrators to make their scores look good, definitely. But I think that a lot of this makes it even tougher for parents to fairly assess how well their kids are doing, how well the school is doing. So what we've done here at the Tribune is, we've even stopped looking at a lot of these AYP categories and just started focusing more on the raw data and analyzing the raw data to discover how schools are doing, what kind of progress they're making, what kind of progress are the different economic and racial groups making, because there are so many provisions that are under AYP, under NCLB, and they just keep growing year after year, that it just makes it virtually impossible to do any sort of comparisons from one year to the next to see whether or not a school or a group of kids are making progress, because you're always comparing apples to oranges. Things are always different the next year. Some new provision has been added, some new threshold has been added, some old threshold has been changed, and it just makes it impossible to get a fair assessment of whether or not the kids are making progress. So we've just gone back to looking at the raw data and not paying as much attention to a lot of the different categories and fields that are provided under No Child Left Behind.
Okay, so how would parents otherwise get this information about the reporting?
Well, parents do have access to the report cards. They can get hard copies of them, or if they have internet access, they can get them off the web. Now, it can take quite a bit of work and a little bit of savvy in order to decipher a lot of it, but it can be done. Also, the information that we work with here at the Tribune, it's all public information. So any parent, any citizen is entitled to ask the State Board of Education or their local boards of education, where the districts that they live in, to get that kind of information and to look at it themselves. It does take a bit of work if you've never looked at it before, and you may have to bring yourself up to speed in order to understand a lot of those things. But it could be worth it if you have a kid in school and you really want to know how well the school is doing. There's also lots of advocacy groups, lots of academics who do work in this area, who publish papers, and who get together fairly recently to talk about these issues, especially to talk about No Child Left Behind, local school councils, things of that nature. So for parents, it just basically will probably take getting a little bit involved with some of these groups to get themselves up to speed. But all the information that we work with, it's public information. It's available to any parent, to any citizen of the state. And it's just a matter of, taking the time to actually get it and start looking at it for yourself.
I want to thank you very much for your comments today, and we'll look forward to your future articles as you continue to follow this story.